Welcome to the Cover Two Men podcast.
where two men cover stuff.
I'm Grant,
And I'm Bryce.
and today we will be talking about the Baltimore Ravens. The Ravens are, I would say, the favorite to win this division, but they didn't make the playoffs last year. They didn't win the division last year, which was very wide open, and I think maybe a lot of the hype around them might be fraudulent, but they still are a good team. So today we're going to evaluate where actually do they fit in the NFL. Are they a Super Bowl contender or are they a wild card team?
To me, I feel like in the past, this team, the roster has had the talent to be a Super Bowl contender. And as much as Ravens fans like to say that, this could be their year, like they've said many years, I just feel like every year that goes by, the older and older that this roster is getting, and that Super Bowl window is just closing shut. I mean, sure they have some young talent, but like the general roster has got to be one of the oldest in the NFL, and that Super Bowl window is closing by the year. This year, I personally don't think they're going to be a Super Bowl contender. Do I think there's a chance they win? Maybe, but I would call them more of a wild card, maybe make it to the divisional round team than a Super Bowl team.
I get what you're saying. When we talk about age, players like Derrick Henry, Mark Andrews, and Ronnie Stanley all are 30 and over. Those are some of the big stars on this Baltimore Ravens team, and we don't know how many years they have left. It's pretty concerning if you're a Baltimore Ravens fan because it looks like they're getting about one good rookie every year, and they're having two of their stars start to get washed, if you feel what I'm saying. If you look at this
Sure.
defense, they've brought in players like Malachi Starks, Nate Wiggins, and Kyle Hamilton recently on the defense. And while I love Kyle Hamilton, I don't know if he's going to make up for all of the age that they have in other positions. Roquan Smith is 29 now. He's past his prime. Last year, he only had 76 tackles with no other stats to surround that. I think as we go over this defense a little bit later, we're going to start to notice that well, they may have some promising rookies, and they've definitely hit in the draft recently on all their picks, especially in the first round. They're not putting in enough new talent to replace old talent.
Another questionable part of their team is their offensive line. It was already not great last year, and they lost their best offensive lineman in Tyler Linderbaum. So who knows how good it's going to be able to be this year.
The offensive line brought in rookie Olavide Aone recently, but the question is that good enough for their entire offensive line to stay consistent? And I think that they have a lot of young players in this line. If you look at center Corey Bullock, he's only 24. Roger Rosengarten is only 24. They do have some of the older veterans on the starting line, like John Simpson and Ronnie Stanley, which are 28 and 32 respectively. But I think the fact that they have players at all ages, I think that they could hit really well, but it really depends.
Like you said, having those two older guys could really help the younger guys develop faster. Because, a team that has all 22 to 25-year-olds on the line with no veteran presence, it's going to struggle at first because they don't have any mentorship. But having those two older guys could help. While I still think it is fairly questionable, their performance was lacking somewhat last season. But I don't think it's a bad O line, but it's definitely not the best part of their team for sure.
They also bring in Jonathan Gwynn from the Falcons over this free agency. So they have bring in some lineman depth as well. Bear in mind, Jonathan Gwynn is 27. If we're talking about fitting a perfect range of ages from the line, I think they have done that very well. The question is, how long will they be able to rely on Ronnie Stanley? I think that's a big question for this team when it comes to their offensive line because Ronnie Stanley is 32 years old. I mean, he's got the old name, Ronnie Stanley. I don't know anybody under 30 that's named Ronnie, especially Stanley. That's besides the point. Ronnie Stanley could end up having a fall off year where he is just not the same player. And if for a team that wants to make it to the Super Bowl, I think they need to find a good replacement for the great left tackle that they have. They did bring in rookie Diego Pounds from Old Miss, but I'm sure that they're not trying to make him the future at left tackle, considering that he is in the third string right now. So maybe that's going to be something that comes in the draft.
Yeah, it definitely could be. The offensive line is an important position coming up in the draft, the next season draft that they might focus on, or a midseason trade. Another thing that could really help this team be, step into the conversation of maybe being a contender would be like, maybe a trade for a good wide receiver or, an offensive lineman. The thing is, when it comes to this receiver core, it's not a horrible receiving core, but it's really not great. Zay Flowers, some people like him, some people don't. I personally, I'm not big on Zay Flowers. He may have some decent stats. He fumbles the ball a lot. That's a problem. If you want to call him a good receiver, he is their only good receiver on their roster. So that's another big position of need on this offense.
The wide receiver room for the Ravens, I think, is one that is going to require rookies and younger players to step up. If you look at Rashad Bateman, Zay Flowers may have been 11th in receptions and 7th in yards, but that is very concerning when you add on the fact that he only had 5 touchdowns, which is tied for 44th. You could argue Derrick Henry, he had 16 touchdowns. It's second for running backs. Maybe Zay Flowers just didn't get a lot of touches in the red zone, but he still was a good player besides that. But then let's point out his average yards of reception, which was only 27th in the league. For someone who had 7th in yards, but only 27th in average reception, I don't know. I really don't know about this guy. I mean, we've seen his playoff performances, the fumble in the red zone. I know that was a long time ago, but it's still concerning because I think that was the last time that the Ravens made the playoffs, if I'm correct. 19 receptions and 224 yards for Rashad Bateman is an average of 11.8. For the wide receivers that are supposed to be leading this team, they're not very deep threats. And I know we can talk about Devontae Walker averaging 22 yards of reception, but I think this wide receiver room is going to be outshined by 2 rookies, and that's Jacoby Lane and Elijah Sherratt from this last draft. Jacoby Lane was taken in round 3, and Elijah Sherratt was taken a little bit after in round 4. Both of these rookies could have been drafted way earlier, and I think both of them will be the wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 2 in this group. That's my wild hot take for the prediction for the Ravens.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's possible. I think for sure this season, while, like I said, I'm not big on Zay Flowers, he probably will stay the wide receiver 1 for now, but in the future, for sure, those 2 rookies, if they step up, hopefully they could take over as the wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 2 for this team.
The last name that needs mentioning, and I hope he makes the roster, is LeJounte Wester from last year. LeJounte Wester was a 6th-round pick for the Ravens in 2025, if you've never heard of him. And he is known for, at least for me, 1, for his cool name. 2, in a preseason game, he predicted that he was going to have a punt return for a touchdown. And little do you know, he actually did have a punt return for a touchdown. I'm not sure if it was a punt return or a kick return. I don't exactly remember. But the name in the highlight is what reminds me of him. And ever since then, I've been rooting for him. And I hope that he makes the roster and maybe even get some actual good wide receiver reps. Let's talk about this quarterback room. Obviously, they have Lamar Jackson. I think we should talk about him a little bit later. I think we got to point out Tyler Huntley is still in this quarterback room. And what's funny to me is if you remember in all the Browns quarterback drama last year with Shadur Sanders, Dylan Gabriel, Deshaun Watson, and all of them, Tyler Huntley was actually in that group for a little bit. He left the Ravens to go to the Browns. Now, from the Browns' perspective, and I know this isn't a Browns podcast today, I just got to ask, why would you bring in Tyler Huntley? What more can he add when you already had 5 quarterbacks on that roster with Joe Flacco, Dylan Gabriel, Shadur Sanders, Kenny Pickett, and Deshaun Watson? What more could he add? But from Tyler Huntley's perspective, I totally get it. You want to go maybe start? That could have been a possibility for him if he played good enough. Obviously, he didn't, and the Ravens were smart enough to welcome him right back into their roster.
Yeah, I mean, I remember, I'm a Packers fan, and last season there was a game that he started for them against the Packers, and he actually played surprisingly well. That was, the battle of the two backup quarterbacks. We were starting Malik Willis because Jordan Love was injured, and they were starting Tyler Huntley because Lamar was injured. They ended up coming away with the victory. Was that victory because of Tyler Huntley? Not entirely. Derrick
Yeah,
Henry absolutely took over that
Henry
game.
had 216 yards and 4 touchdowns that game. But even though Tyler Huntley didn't have a lot of yards, he still had an 80% completion.
Yeah, he when he was needed to play and when he needed to get the passing yards and get the passing attempts, he was able to perform in that game. And throughout the season, you know, did he look like a Lamar Jackson? Did he look like a starting quarterback? Maybe not, but he did look like a decent quarterback that maybe he could be traded for some picks or kept just in case Lamar does get injured. And you also got to look at Diego Pavia. He's really small, but he was the runner up to the Heisman, so he could be an okay backup.
Yeah,
Also,
they brought in two rookies this year with Joey Fagano and Diego Pavia. I think both of them uh, are in an interesting dilemma, just considering this group that already has the first starter and second string locked up, essentially. None of these guys are probably going to ever touch the field unless it's in a preseason game. But I still think Diego Pavia and all of the drama that's been surrounding him is still an interesting addition to this team. He is the third string in this group, which makes me wonder if that is just how they set up that, not the actual like roster setup and just putting the names down on this depth chart, or if he's actually playing better than Diego Pavia at camp. I would like to know.
yeah, I feel like I saw some things about Diego Pavia having some pretty good throws in camp, but I could be wrong. I just feel like I remember something about that though.
Oh, I mean, I'm rooting for him just considering all of his history at Vanderbilt, and I've had a soft spot for Vanderbilt since they've been good. Let's go over this defense. Now, you have Justin Matabuke, who is now under a different name. I'm not even going to try and pronounce that, but he had 5 solo tackles and 2 sacks last year. However, it's worthy to note he only played 2 games. And considering that he had a sack in each of those games, I think that just shows that even at 28 years old, like 28 is his prime. Some people fall off at once they get up to that age, but real stars, that's when they start peaking. And I think even playing 2 games, we saw enough from him to know that he'll be good still. Then you got Travis Jones and nose tackle, 20 solo tackles and 5 sacks. That's a 4-to-1 solo tackle to sack ratio. Awesome. A forced fumble for him as well. So for him, actually, he did play the full season, which I was like a little bit curious on that originally when I saw his stats. I was like, I'm not sure if 20 solo tackles from a first stringer is a little bit concerning, but I think this Ravens team overall distributes their tackles pretty evenly throughout the board. If you look at John Jenkins, 16 solo tackles, 1 sack, and 2 forced fumbles. Double-digit sacks from I think every single starter except for the ones that got injured. Tavius Robinson had 15 sacks and 4.5, or had 15 solo tackles and 4.5 sacks. Roquan Smith last year had 76. That's eighth in the NFL. Maybe not evenly distributed now that I talk about it, but they don't really need to get the tackles because Roquan Smith seems to have it all down.
For sure. I mean, the defense wasn't when it comes to rankings of defense, they weren't ranked extremely high last season to my knowledge, but I feel like they could have been. I know they dealt with a little bit of injuries, which every team does, but something about the Ravens was just off last season because the Ravens roster last season and the season before last was the same, and obviously a big part of that was Lamar's injury. I'm sure that was the main reason they didn't do as good last season. But with him returning, with some other key players returning, I think this team could be, maybe back to how they used to be almost, maybe not quite, but I feel like, you know, 8 and 9, I'm sure they're going to do better than that. This defense, I feel like the defense is going to perform you know, better than they did last year too. But new head coach, different ways of training, everything could be changed.
Yes, and I get what you mean by a new head coach, and I think that's where the optimism mainly stems from because exciting offensive coordinators usually get a lot of hype, and especially their teams get a lot of hype whenever they move positions. But the most concerning thing I gotta say is just where the tackles for this team lie. I know. I'm sorry. I just went on a huge rant about all the tackles for for the defensive line and the linebackers. But the more I dig into this team, the more I find out things that might be a little bit concerning. Okay, they have a star-studded secondary. Don't get me wrong. Nate Wiggins had 57 tackles. Kyle Hamilton had 59. Malachi Starks had 49. Great numbers. But when your defensive line, and John had mentioned this, I think Bryce, you and I had a conversation about this a couple episodes ago, when the secondary is getting the tackles. I think that's a little bit concerning because that means that there might be some completions that are happening, or the ball is going to places where only the secondary can get those tackles. I mean, when you have those high numbers, I don't think it's just that you have a star-studded secondary. I think that people are getting too many completions on you.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that is something we definitely saw from this Ravens defense last year. There was, a lack of defensive line presence. They didn't get to, the receiver, the running back, whoever had the ball as quick as they should have.
I think it's definitely misleading the fact that they did rank 10th in NFL in run defense last year, but their pass defense was tied for 30th. So the run defense may have been good. The pass defense allowing uh, 23 passing touchdowns last season and 247.9 yards a game. The passing defense is why I think the secondary gets all those tackles because they allow completions and they tackle them. So it may be misleading to say that it is the run defense just not doing its thing, and that's why the secondary gets the tackles. I think it's the lack of a pass rush for this Ravens team. Like you pointed out, the defensive line not being present, and the secondary also just not doing well. And I think those two things complement each other. I mean, I'm a Panthers fan. I looked at I got to evaluate my team's defensive line and say, okay, we didn't get a lot of pressure last year. That's why we brought in Jalen Phillips. But that's also a reason why our pass defense wasn't awesome as well because they have to guard wide receivers that get more time to be open, that get more accurate passes because the quarterback that has zero pressure on him.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. That makes sense.
Well, overall, this team, I think, can be described as strong in some positions, maybe not as strong in some other positions. I mean, this secondary is absolutely elite. Nate Wiggins, Kyle Hamilton, Malachi Starks, Chidobe Awuzie, Marlon Humphrey. Uh, you are not getting that secondary anywhere else. Let's just be honest. The defensive line is not good though.
Like you said, I mean, the secondary didn't rank good. I think they're talented. While they didn't rank good, uh, I still think the secondary could be good. The defensive line is a little shaky, pretty old. Offensive line is questionable, young, with a few veterans. The quarterback room, as long as Lamar's healthy, is good. Receiver room is questionable. And I mean, this team overall is just a big what if. I mean, they have a talented roster with older players, and with age comes more injuries, possibly. And with injuries comes losing games. And it's just a team of what if, because this roster is just very old, mostly. Yes, they have some younger players, but generally they are an old team that, if they can play to the level they did in the past, if the veterans can play like they did in their prime, then this team could go to the Super Bowl. But more than likely, I just can't see, with how old their roster is, I can't see them being able to keep up with some of the younger teams in the NFL. I
Yeah,
can't. And I just can't see this team being quite as good as they have been in the past.
Oh, I don't blame you for that. I don't blame you. With a team like this, when you have holes in certain areas, and overall it's like a mix of not necessarily mediocre, but just star-studded positions and concerning positions all on one team, I think the best way to evaluate where this team could go is looking at the schedule and seeing who do they play. So let's briefly go over their schedule and talk about everybody that they are going to be playing this season.
You go to their week one opener, Colts. It's played in Indianapolis. So, like I've said in some of the previous podcasts, I feel like the Colts, Daniel Jones got injured, and that's when they fell off. At the beginning of the season, when he was healthy, they were one of the best teams in the NFL. And they haven't really lost any players. You know, they lost a few, but the majority of this roster is still there. So, especially with it being in Indianapolis, if Daniel Jones can play at the same level, I think I would call this one a close game, but I would like to give it to the Colts. But it just depends on if Daniel Jones comes back and plays at the level he does. But if he does, if everything goes like it should, with him playing how he did, I'm gonna call this a loss in week one for the Ravens, but I think it'll be a good game.
Oh, I am very thrilled for this game. And like you said, I am really thrilled for this Indianapolis podcast because they were a really great offense last year. They were a great team overall. Also, they added and traded for Sauce Gardner in the middle of the season around the time that Daniel Jones' injury happened. I would
Yeah.
love to see where this team can go with not only a healthy Daniel Jones, if he can play it to the same level he did last year, but also a Sauce Gardner that is healthy, refreshed. It is
Yeah,
going to be a tough game for the Ravens.
for sure.
Let's not lie to ourselves. It's going to be tough. But
Yeah, I mean, with them trading for Sauce Gardner, maybe he wasn't the best corner in the NFL last season, but you got to think you can't expect a player to be thrown into a whole new team mid-season and perform the same way he always has. He had been on the Jets since he was drafted, and you can't expect him to perfectly know the plays and perfectly know how to fit into the scheme. Now he has a whole off season to learn everything so he can come back and perform at the same level. And, you know, the best stats for a corner is might not be as eye popping as you would think. Zero interceptions and, you know, less tackles for a corner, to be honest with you, isn't bad stats because that just means people are scared to throw it to the wide receiver that are being guarded by that corner. That's why Sauce Gardner sometimes doesn't have eye popping numbers. It's because nobody throws it to the receiver that he's guarding because they're terrified that he's going to, they know that he can get in front of the ball and intercept it or keep the receiver from catching it.
oh, 100%, 100%. You nailed every conversation about Sauce Gardner on the head with that statement. I think this Ravens schedule can be summarized up into a couple of chapters. Okay, weeks 2 through 6 are kind of the same thing. I think they could run through that part of their schedule and end up 5-1. They drop the game to Indianapolis, is what we're thinking. The next 5 games, weeks 2 through 4, I think if they're hosting it and we're looking at the peaks of this team, those are all wins.
I think so.
Week
Maybe the Cowboys give them a little bit of trouble with that powerful offense.
Oh yeah, and
They
that
have
one's
some
being
new
at played
defensive
at
players.
a neutral location. I don't remember where. Then they go at Atlanta. That one will be tough as well. At Cleveland
Yeah.
as well. I think if we're looking at a good Ravens team though, and a hungry Ravens team after that Indianapolis loss, I think the Indianapolis loss could be great for them because those next 5 games are winnable. They can start out 5-1, but the
Yeah.
next weeks 7 through 12, that's going to be pretty tough.
Yeah. So one thing I want to look at is this Bengals team. They've added Dexter Lawrence to this defense, which is their most questionable part. They also, I don't remember really who they drafted, but I'm pretty sure they got some defensive players. They signed a few defensive players. Do I think this defense on the Bengals is going to be great? No. But the offense is so overpowered. I feel like this is going to be a tough game for the Ravens. And the fact that I feel like at this point they could be 5-1. I do think they're going to drop this game. I feel like they're going to split. And to be honest with you, with this game, I don't think it really matters where it's played. I still think it's going to be a loss with the fact that they'll be 5-1 and they're going up against a high-powered offense with a defense that could look a little better and a healthy Joe Burrow. I see them losing this game, not by a lot, but I think that's going to put them at 5-2. And then you got to go up against the Bills. If Josh Allen is healthy, I think this is going to be another loss. Josh Allen generally stays healthy. He's not a very injury prone quarterback. And they did add DJ Moore, who, showed some flashes last season. He's not a young guy, but he's still got a few good years, and he's definitely going to help this receiver core. And the Bills team overall, looking in, if you take away Josh Allen, they're not the most talented roster in the NFL. But I mean, come on, they have Josh Allen, and they also have a top 5 running back in the NFL. If you don't want to say top 5, he's for sure top 10. So they have a great run game and one of the best quarterbacks, if not the best quarterback in the NFL. So, like I said, I think this is going to be another loss, putting them at 5-3. Then you have the Jaguars. The Jaguars lost, a few key players. They lost their running back. They don't really have much of a running game at this point. They just have young players that they're hoping can be their new running back. And their receiving core is okay. Trevor Lawrence had a pretty good season last year. I don't think this team is as good as it was last year. So I'm going to call this a win for the Ravens. I'm going to say that, which would put them at 6-3, which isn't bad. I mean, that's still a good record by this week. Then you have the Chargers. I mean, the Chargers, I think they're a good team. They have a good quarterback with some good receivers, a pretty good, running back, a decent defense. I mean, I think this is going to be a good game. It's hard to say who is going to win this one. What do you think about this one?
I think we're too far out for it to be a predictions video, especially for games like this one. I think overall, I think we could just call this like a close game. Like it could go either way and then move on. I don't think we should give this one like a win or loss yet because there's a lot of these games that are very subjective. So
For sure.
I would say put weeks 10 through 12. And yes, I know I'm putting Carolina in there. I'm just, we'll get to Carolina when we get to Carolina. But let's just say all these next 3 games are just like ifs. I could see them
Yeah.
beating all those 3 teams, especially Carolina. They're probably going to whoop us. But who knows?
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I mean, you look at Carolina's revamped defense and Bryce Young coming off a decent season. I think this might be closer than some people expect. I've seen a lot of people out there saying, oh, Carolina's not going to do good. They're going to lose the division. I really don't think that. I think Carolina is going to be a pretty good team with how honestly bad their division is. I mean, their division got better for sure, talent wise, but talent isn't everything in the NFL. It's a part of it, but there's more to it than just having a stacked roster. So I think this is going to be a better game than people expect, and I think it could go either way. And I think home field advantage, whoever field it's played at, could play a part too. Then you move on to the Texans. I can't see the Ravens winning that one. I could be wrong, but I'm going to call that one a loss for sure because the Texans defense. The only problem is C.J. Stroud. Depends on how he plays, but I still think that this is going to be a loss for the Ravens. And then you got the bye.
I think after the bye, I think the Ravens make a run. The Ravens schedule isn't too hard. But
Yeah,
you look at some of the games, the Buffalo game, the Los Angeles game, the Houston game, even the Jacksonville game to certain extents, the Carolina game at Atlanta versus Dallas on a neutral site. That's just going to be some games. that if you look at this Ravens team, they're trying to make it. They're trying to make it to the Super Bowl in this closing window that is kind of opening a little bit with all these good rookies on the defense, but also closing considering that some of your best players are old in age. The last 5 games are must wins for this team. When we're
Yeah,
talking about seeding, not having to play, maybe a resurgent Chiefs team that's going to be hungry, maybe a tough Bills team that both teams have given Ravens terrible, heartbreaking losses in the playoffs. Seeding does matter, Ravens, and you guys need to win these games. The last 5 games, we can talk about who may have the odds in Cleveland, maybe a sneaky upset, and Pittsburgh might pull one off. But at the end of the day, the Ravens are going to be hungry for every single win they can get. And if we look at
for
these
sure.
5 games, I don't see any of these teams fighting as hard as the Ravens need to be fighting, considering their circumstances.
Yeah, I think when it comes to talent and when it comes to, like you said, the hungriness, I think the Ravens could run the schedule and win these last 5 games. I think they could, and I don't think it would be a hard thing when it comes to the fact of who's the better team. The question is, are they going to get, are they going to choke? Because teams all the time lose to teams that are worse than them because they choke. And when it comes to who's the better team, I think the Ravens could go 12-5, maybe 13-4. Do I think it's going to be because they're a legit contender? No. I think it's just because they really don't have that hard of a schedule. To be honest with you, I think they could come in with a 12-5, 13-4 record, and then everybody looks at their record and says, "Oh, okay, they're a Super Bowl contender," and then they go in and lose in the divisional or wild card round. Is kind of what I think is going to happen. Am I saying they're not making the Super Bowl? They're not contenders? No. I just think it's almost kind of like last year, the Patriots situation. The Patriots had an easy schedule. They made the Super Bowl. They pulled off some wins in the playoffs. And I think it would be that kind of situation if the Ravens, were to make the playoffs. It would be another situation. Well, they did because of their easy schedule somewhat, but they're still talented, so they still have a chance.
Yeah, and speaking of the Patriots, that was Lamar's worst game last season. Looking at the regular season, though, he only played 13 games, still had 2,500 yards, 3 to 1 touchdown interception ratio. Not great, but I think Lamar Jackson is just really great in the regular season, just overall throughout his career. We look at these games. I think the Ravens finish maybe 10 to 11 wins, just considering their schedule. And if they can pull that 5 game run at the end, I think 11 wins is definitely in the picture for them. But they could also easily lose game 7 through 12 pretty badly. So
For sure.
I don't know. I think that's probably for the Ravens fans watching this video to decide. Comment down below. What is the Ravens' projected win totals for you? Like, how many wins do you think that they are going to get, Ravens fans? Please comment that down below because I would love to hear your guys' opinion on the schedule. Rough stretches, but also easy stretches. So I think this defines this Ravens team where a lot of certain spots on this Ravens roster are insane, just like parts of the schedule are insane, but a lot of the parts in this roster are very lacking, just like some of the stretches that they have to they go through teams that are lacking skill. I know it's a tough comparison, but I think I made it work.
Yeah.
Well, that is it for the Ravens. Thank you guys for watching, and this is the Cover 2 Men.